Today, a sister from Afghanistan who was once a Muslim, but now a Christian, sent in her experience and encounter with Jesus. I was born in Afghanistan, a place that was my home but often felt more like a battleground. Growing up during the Afghan Civil War meant that my life was surrounded by conflict, fear, and a constant awareness of instability. My family was devoutly Muslim, like most families around us, and religion shaped every part of our daily lives. From a young age, I learned the prayers, the rituals, and the duties expected of me as a Muslim. The war and unrest pushed us to seek safety elsewhere, and eventually we moved to Pakistan. But even there, in a small, deeply religious town, my life remained tightly bound by Islamic expectations. As a young girl, I began noticing things that troubled me. There were questions, ideas I didn't fully understand yet, but they were seeds that would later grow into a journey of spiritual awakening. Looking back, I can see how this time shaped me, even though, in those moments, it felt like survival was all we could focus on. The strict rules, the expectations, and the pressures around me only intensified my desire to seek something more, to find a truth that went beyond rituals and traditions. As I grew older, a curiosity about faith and religion started taking root within me. I wanted to understand more deeply why we believed what we did, why we practiced the rituals, and what it all truly meant. But the more I observed and questioned, the more certain things didn't make sense to me. In the teachings and practices of Islam, I began to see things that felt harsh and unjust. I struggled with the way women were treated and how some teachings seemed to silence us or make us feel lesser. Growing up, I'd seen examples of women being held back, their voices quieted, their lives shaped by limitations that didn't feel fair. These weren't isolated incidents, they were woven into the very fabric of what I'd been taught to believe. This growing sense of injustice didn't sit well with me. The questions only grew louder in my mind, even if I couldn't always put words to them. In time, these doubts would lead me to a place of deeper searching, a longing to find something beyond what I had always known. My doubts grew sharper as I delved deeper into the Quran's teachings, especially those concerning women and family life. Reading verses that outlined how men were allowed to treat their wives and the authority they held over women was unsettling. It painted a picture of family life that seemed to hinge on control rather than compassion and understanding. One story in particular became a turning point for me, the tragic account of a young girl, a child bride, who had lost her life due to abuse. The weight of her story stayed with me, igniting questions that couldn't be ignored. How could a just God allow such practices? How could any religion claim that this was part of a divine plan? As I wrestled with these painful realities, I felt a yearning for a God who was truly compassionate and just, a God who valued each person's life and dignity. This search became my own silent plea, a hope for something better, for a faith that didn't ask me to accept cruelty as righteousness. Driven by a hunger for truth, I began exploring other religions, hoping to find a belief system that aligned with the values I yearned for: justice, compassion, and respect for life. Hinduism was the first path I encountered, with its rich philosophies and diverse deities. I found beauty in its expressions of spirituality, but I struggled with the idea of many gods and complex rituals. It left me searching for something simpler, something more personal. Next, I looked into Zoroastrianism. I admired its teachings on good and evil, light and darkness, and its emphasis on moral integrity. Yet, as fascinating as it was, it didn't answer the deeper questions about grace and forgiveness that had started to weigh on my heart. Finally, I explored Judaism, drawn to its history and connection to the one God. I respected its deep traditions and commitment to community, but it felt distant, like a faith focused more on collective identity than on a personal relationship with God. Each path offered insights, but none provided the sense of spiritual closeness and grace I was seeking. My journey continued, my heart still restless for a truth that resonated deeply. One night, after days and weeks of wrestling with questions that seemed impossible to answer, something happened that I could never have expected. It was as if everything around me grew still, everything in my mind and heart, every doubt, every question, fell quiet. I was alone in my room, the evening air heavy with the weight of my search. The flickering of a single candle on the table beside me cast shadows across the walls, but the room felt strangely illuminated, as though another kind of light was beginning to fill the space. Suddenly, it was as if the light in the room itself shifted. A brilliant radiance, brighter than anything I had ever seen, filled the air. It wasn't blinding, but a warm, gentle light, so different from the harsh, unforgiving flashes of religious rules and expectations that had once defined my understanding of God. This light seemed to wrap around me, surrounding me in a profound sense of peace. The room faded, and I found myself in a space that felt otherworldly. There was no sound except the beating of my own heart, and yet, in that silence, I felt as if I could hear something deeper, a presence that filled me completely. And then, I saw him, Jesus. He appeared in the center of that light, not as the figure I had once heard about in passing or seen in pictures, but as someone real, someone personal, someone who I knew, without a doubt, was there for me. His presence was powerful, yet gentle, a stark contrast to the image of Allah I had grown up with, distant, unapproachable, a figure of authority that seemed more like a judge than a loving father. As I looked at him, a wave of love washed over me. It wasn't just a love that I could feel, but a love that I could see in his eyes, a deep, unshakable affection, as though I had been known and loved long before I ever realized it. His gaze wasn't filled with judgment, condemnation, or even disappointment. It was a gaze full of compassion, full of understanding, as if he knew every struggle I had faced, every question I had asked, and yet he still chose to love me. In that moment, everything I had ever believed about God shifted. I remember feeling completely embraced in that love, surrounded by a peace that I had never known, one that was so real I could almost reach out and touch it. The love was personal. It wasn't just for humanity at large, it was for me, for the broken, lost person I had become in my search for truth. The fear, the confusion, all the questions that had plagued me for so long, they melted away, as if they had never existed. In that encounter, I understood something I had never been able to grasp before, the true nature of God. God was not about rules and punishment, not about distant commands to be obeyed or harsh laws to be followed. The God I had always known through Islam seemed so far removed from me, a God I was meant to fear and serve, but never truly know. But this God, Jesus, was close, personal, and full of grace. It wasn't a cold, impersonal force. It was a God who desired to be in relationship with me, who called me near, not because of what I had done or what I could do, but because of who I was in his eyes, loved. I was no longer just a servant or a subject. I was a beloved child. I could feel that truth deep in my bones, and for the first time in my life, I knew what true love felt like. There was no fear of punishment here, no striving to prove my worth. I felt at home in this love, as though it had been waiting for me all along. For a long time, I just sat there in the presence of that light, completely still, unable to fully comprehend what had just happened. I had found what I had been searching for all those years, but in a way I never could have imagined. It was a love that didn't demand but instead invited. It was a love that called me to be free, to be whole, and to know that I was accepted, not for what I could give, but simply because I was me. The weight of my search, my doubt, my struggle, it all dissolved in the overwhelming presence of that love. I had thought that I was seeking God, but what I had really been seeking all along was this, a love that is perfect, unwavering, and eternal. That night my journey changed. I was no longer in search of a distant, demanding God. I had encountered the very God who loved me, who saw me, and who called me into the light of his grace. After encountering Jesus, a profound transformation began within me. For the first time, I saw Jesus as more than just a prophet or a historical figure. He was love, grace, and compassion embodied. His presence filled me with a deep sense of peace and acceptance that I had never found before. Through him, I began to understand God's forgiveness and mercy in a new way. It wasn't something I had to earn by striving endlessly, it was offered freely, an invitation to step into a life of hope and healing. This grace was unlike anything I'd known, and it revealed the gaps I'd felt in my former beliefs. I started to see the limitations in the teachings I'd grown up with. The emphasis on rituals and rules had left me feeling distanced from God, but Jesus' message was different. It was personal, filled with love and mercy, and it drew me closer, giving me a sense of belonging that was deeply healing. As I delved deeper into the Bible, I discovered a profound difference between Allah as I had known Him and the God revealed through Jesus. The nature of God in the Bible was unlike anything I had expected. In Christianity, I encountered a God whose essence was love, compassion, and deep understanding, a God who reached out to humanity not through harsh commands, but through grace and mercy. This was a stark contrast to what I had known in Islam, where assurance of salvation was elusive, constantly dependent on my own actions and works. In Islam, there was always uncertainty, never knowing if I had done enough, prayed enough, or been righteous enough to truly be accepted by Allah. But in Christianity, I found the incredible assurance of grace. Jesus had taken my place, offering salvation not as something I had to earn, but as a gift given freely, out of pure love. In Jesus, I saw a Savior who called people out of fear and into love. His message wasn't rooted in rigid rules or rituals but in a relationship, offering a path to God where love, not fear, was the foundation. For the first time, I felt a profound sense of peace, knowing that I was fully known, fully loved, and fully accepted just as I was. When I finally made the decision to follow Jesus, I knew it would be difficult to share with my family. Yet, nothing could fully prepare me for their reactions when I broke the news. My mother, especially, took it the hardest. She felt as if I was rejecting not just our religion, but our heritage, our family history, and everything she had taught me. Her initial response was intense. She was angry, hurt, and even made threats, desperate to dissuade me from this path. Seeing her heartbreak was agonizing. I understood how deeply she felt about our faith, and her reaction came from a place of love, even if it was clouded by fear and cultural expectations. But no matter how hard it was, I knew I couldn't turn back. I had found a truth and peace in Jesus that I couldn't deny, even if it meant standing alone. Though I was afraid of losing my family and everything familiar, I chose to stay firm in my newfound faith, trusting that God would guide me through whatever lay ahead. The decision to follow Jesus came with a heavy cost. As soon as my family found out, the rejection and isolation set in. I was no longer welcomed in the same way, and many of my friends distanced themselves from me. I felt the sting of being cast out, but even in the midst of that, I felt a deeper peace than I had ever known. My relationship with my family was never going to be the same, and I had to grapple with the pain of losing their approval. Yet, I knew in my heart that I had made the right choice. In a Muslim family, this kind of decision doesn't come without tension. The values, beliefs, and cultural expectations are deeply ingrained, and stepping away from them is seen as a betrayal. But through it all, I found strength in Jesus, even when I felt the weight of their disapproval. Thankfully, my husband, though coming from a Muslim background, was open-minded. While he wasn't fully Christian himself, he understood my need to follow my heart and my faith. His support, though not always easy, was crucial to me. Despite the pressure from his family to abandon me, he stood by me. There were moments when he doubted, and there were struggles, but God's grace worked in our relationship, softening hearts and building bridges where there once was only conflict. Even as I faced rejection, I could feel His presence with me, guiding both of us through this difficult journey. Thank you for staying to the end of this experience. Save a soul by sharing this video with your friends and families, so that they will be saved from the path of hell. Subscribe to our channel if you have not, to remain updated whenever we share another experience that is being sent to us. Thank you.